Good evening, everyone. We're truly glad to have you back with us tonight. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare for another journey into the unknown. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far our haunted stories travel. You're watching Sleep Horror Stories. My grandfather was always a man of few words. Someone who had lived through too much to care about what others thought. He never liked talking about the town he was born in. In fact, he avoided even mentioning it. As a curious kid, I'd ask him questions about his childhood and his family. But he would always shut down. It wasn't until I turned 18, when he was already a frail old man with a distant look in his eyes and a face full of scars, that he finally told me what happened. He spoke without emotion, as if the story was a burden he had carried for too long, one he needed to release before it was too late. This is the story my grandfather told me. He was born in a town that, according to him, no longer exists. A place that doesn't appear on maps or GPS routes. A ghost town with dusty roads, adobe homes, and a suffocating atmosphere where every sunrise felt like a funeral. This place wasn't governed by laws, but by a group of women everyone knew only as the witches. Locals whispered that these women could bend reality to their will, making dark pacts with forces no sane person would dare to name. No one spoke about them openly, but everyone knew they were there, watching, hidden in the shadows. It was said they could smell pregnant women or newborns, and if a baby was born in that town, chances were it would vanish within days. The stories claimed the witches used those babies in twisted rituals to remain young, or to renew their covenants with ancient, evil entities. Some parents, out of desperation, even handed over their own children in exchange for better harvests, more livestock, or just a less miserable life. The town was imprisoned under the control of those women. My great-grandparents lived in constant fear, like everyone else. But when my great-grandmother found out she was pregnant, she made a choice. Her child would not be a sacrifice. My grandfather hadn't even been born yet when they started planning their escape. They knew they couldn't just leave. The witches kept watch over every road out. If they sensed the scent of a pregnant woman, they would come for her. With what little they had, they contacted a cattle transporter who moved livestock between towns and cities. He was quiet, with a shady reputation, but he agreed to help for a price that cost my great-grandparents everything they had ever saved. It was the only way to save their unborn child. The plan was dangerous. My great-grandmother hid among the cattle, covered in manure and straw to mask her scent. Meanwhile, my great-grandfather distracted anyone who might grow suspicious. That night, before they left, the tension in the house was unbearable. She could barely breathe. Every creak outside made her clutch her belly tighter, praying in silence that her baby would make it to safety. As the wagon rolled down the dusty roads, she could hear the cows lowing and the clop of horseshoes echoing in the night. She felt watched, like eyes were tracking them from the trees. But she didn't dare look. She knew if she turned her head, she might see something she couldn't unsee. After what felt like an eternity, they made it. A city far from that cursed town, where stories of witches and black magic had no weight. There, free from the gaze of those terrible women, my grandfather was born. He said that was the only time his mother ever spoke of her past. From that day on, they tried to forget it all. They changed their names, never spoke of the witches, never mentioned the town again. But something always lingered. Paranoia, a feeling of being watched, shadowy figures glimpsed in the corners of their eyes. Some nights, my great-grandmother would wake up shaking, claiming to hear whispers, women's voices cursing her and her child. Eventually, they found out the town had been abandoned. One by one, families escaped like mine. The ones who stayed behind stopped having children altogether. Fear had won. The adobe houses crumbled. The witches, if they ever still lived there, faded into the ruins. But the story didn't end there. Some of the few who returned said the place still lived, twisted and vile. Explorers claimed they couldn't breathe the air, as if the atmosphere itself rejected them. Some said they saw hunched old women watching them from the tree-line, just like the witches used to do. Others were pelted with stones, as if the land itself wanted to keep intruders out. But one story stood out. A group of teenagers camped near the ruins one night, mocking the stories. One of them vanished into the trees after claiming he saw someone watching. They found him at dawn, silent, shaking, eyes wide and blank. All he could say was that he saw a woman in rags, with pitch-black eyes, crawling toward him on all fours. That cursed place, whatever it was, never let go of those who escaped. My grandfather always warned me, never look for that town. Some secrets, he'd say, are better left where they belong. Even if the town is empty now, I don't believe the witches ever left. Maybe they're not alive anymore, but what they did while living bound them to that place forever, still watching, still waiting. My grandfather shared this story with me when he was already on his deathbed. He was never the superstitious type, not the kind to believe in ghosts or tell spooky stories just for fun. But what he told me that day has stuck with me ever since. I don't usually talk about it, but since this is a place where we share horror and the unexplained, I think it's the right time to let it out. My grandfather lived in a mining town back in the early 1960s. Back then, it was thriving. Hundreds of families depended on the mine. But over time, everything changed. There was a catastrophic accident in the tunnels. More than 20 miners were crushed beneath tons of rock. The rescue efforts failed. Most of the bodies were never recovered, and not long after, the town began to empty out. Family after family moved away, until the place was reduced to a skeleton of what it once was. The mine was sealed off. The streets turned to dust. The houses collapsed into themselves. And my grandfather was the last one left. It wasn't that he liked being alone. He just had nowhere else to go. Jobs were scarce, and selling property in a dead town? Forget it. So he stayed. He lived in a small cabin at the edge of town, surviving off the little he could hunt or grow. What he never lacked was silence. At first, he said it brought peace. But after a few months, that silence turned into something else. Something disturbing. At night, he began to hear sounds. Knocking, like someone pounding on the ground from inside the mine. He thought it might be small cave-ins, or maybe the wind echoing through the sealed shafts. But the noises were too regular, too sharp, too deliberate. It wasn't long before it began to feel personal. One night, just as he was about to go to bed, the banging got so loud it made the cabin shake. It was like something was demanding to be let out. He told me this part with a trembling voice. Even after all those years, he grabbed his oil lamp. And despite the fear boiling in his chest, he walked toward the mine. And that, he said, was the worst mistake of his life. It was a calm night. The full moon lit everything with a cold glow. The only sounds were the creaking of the floorboards beneath his boots and the pounding from deep below. When he reached the mine entrance, still sealed shut with old beams, the knocking stopped. Suddenly, everything was silent, but the air changed. He said it smelled like wet soil mixed with sulfur. Thick, almost metallic. And then he saw it, a soft light flickering from behind the wooden planks. Not a flame, not a reflection, something unnatural. And out of that dim glow, shadows began to form. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, shapes cast by rocks or trees. But deep down, he knew better. They were people, or what was left of them, the miners. Their skin was stained with cold dust and soot, their eyes hollow, their bodies stiff and twisted. But they weren't begging to be saved. They weren't calling for help. They were looking for something else, more company. My grandfather's heart pounded so hard he thought he'd pass out. He tried to move, to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. It was like fear had nailed him to the ground. I couldn't breathe, he said. It was like they wanted me to join them. Just when he thought he'd be dragged into the earth, a freezing gust of wind slammed into him, snapping him out of the trance. He bolted, ran all the way back to his cabin without looking back. He never saw them again, but he swore he could feel their eyes on him for days. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. His body felt drained, like they had taken something from him. That's when he decided to leave. For good. The next morning, he packed everything he owned and left that town forever. But the story doesn't end there. On his way to a neighboring town, hoping to sell some of his belongings and start over, he stopped at a roadside store. He got to chatting with one of the older clerks, and that's when he heard something that shook him to his core. The clerk told him that the mine collapse was far worse than the public ever knew. Rumor had it some of the miners survived, trapped underground for days before dying. Their bodies were never retrieved. The entrance was sealed too quickly, and their souls? They never moved on. They say the spirits are still down there, the man said, waiting. My grandfather never returned to that place, but he was never free of it either. Even years later, he had nightmares. In them, the miners would appear, silent, dirty, hollow-eyed, beckoning him from the darkness. They never let me go, he told me. They knew I saw them, and they wanted me to come back. That's why he warned me, begged me, never to go near that town. It's still out there, he said. Some people claim you can visit the ruins, but no one stays long. The air is too heavy, and if you stand too close to the old mine entrance, you might still hear them, knocking,